I'm sorry. So we're going to this next. We're going after we're taking part 2 of the timeline we saw last week. The main point that I showed that timeline for, because I'm showing that the world, the secular world and the church world were just melded together. And the startling thing of his timeline is that he's showing the Asian, focused on the Asian or the Oriental Orthodox Church, and he gives us a couple of numbers, and the numbers are in the tens of millions. 40 million monophysite Ethiopian Christians. So I did that so that we would understand that we think of ourselves as kind of alone and isolated and small, but there are gigantic numbers of Christians around the world that we have been, hitherto unaware of. Now, remembering that the Asian, or the Oriental, I keep saying that, the Oriental Orthodox Church are monophysites. He calls them miaphysites, just, tomato. They are people who believe in one nature. So Jesus has 2 natures. He's wholly human and wholly divine. Miaphysites, monophysites believe in one nature. He doesn't have 2 natures. He has one. And we discussed a little bit how about that creates a real theological problem that is rooted in Scripture, where you have Scripture who say he's wholly human, like Paul, he's wholly human and completely divine. So the Scripture reference divides the person of Christ into these 2 places, wholly human and wholly divine. Besides that, you also have the problem of scriptural descriptions. One of them we're going to have today. I'm not going to get into this today, but today is Mark's gospel on the temptation. He's driven to the desert, taken to the desert by the Spirit, where he fasts for 40 days, and then he goes back into town, right? So think about this for a minute. I don't say this in the thing, so I'm not giving any away for the sermon, but Matthew, Mark, and Luke all have the desert temptation. Matthew and Luke, it's very in-depth. It's the 3, the 3 temptations where it's bread and the temple and all the stuff of all the kingdoms of the world are yours. Mark doesn't have that. He just says he goes in the desert, is tempted by Satan, he's really, really hungry. That's about it. There's no detail. But if you go to the detail, Matthew and Luke, even with Mark, you say, okay, so Satan went and tempted Jesus. We got that, right? Why?
Because he's human.
Yes. If he's just one nature and he's just God, there's no point in trying to tempt him. There's nothing there to tempt. He cannot be, put into a position where he's questioning anything or has to rely on anything but himself, because he's completely divine and that's it. There's nothing else. Whereas we see, like this in Scripture, other places where Jesus obviously is relying upon divine authority, divine information, divine knowledge, but he's not accessing that directly. The question, who touched me? When the power went out of him in the crowd, and he said, who touched me? The idea that he was feigning it, who touched me? That's ridiculous. That'd be silly. He literally felt a difference in the movement of the healing power out of him that had a purpose and intention. And people say, well, what might that be? I mean, a lot of people were touching him. A lot of people were being healed. How come this one woman touching him to be healed? Because you think about the story, you think about the event of her being healed led to the event of the public reception of her healing. She became basically an icon of community, because of her illness, she's separated from the community. She was anathema. She was untouchable. I mean, you couldn't even get near her. Men, if they had a chance, would get over here and throw rocks at her. You could not get near her. You'd be ritually unclean for weeks and weeks and weeks. So that, if she just said, oh, I'm clean now, I'm healed, that's not enough. So Jesus, she's healed, and in that moment, she's made known to Jesus by who? Right? God, the Holy Spirit, is letting Jesus know this is a moment. Jesus feels the moment, turns around to find the moment, finds the woman, and now everything unfolds. This is a moment that's bigger than just the healing. It's a moment that goes into the whole community. So these things like this kind of betray or go back on an idea that Jesus has one nature. He's just divine. He's just divine acting like a human. Because if he's just divine acting like a human, he can't put off his divine realities. There's nowhere to go. He's just who he is. So monophysites and us, we not quite on the same channel. But who was it last week that was saying, was it you that were saying that it's comforting because we're that close? Yeah. So really between monophysites and us, we really are, that's really the one thing. And there's little theological things. Who cares about that? It's this one big thing. But let's say we're at the end of time, and the revelation of God is made perfect in us, and we understand who God is. There's no leap here. This is a very easy moment for monophysites to say, oh, okay, I got it now. I mean, it's a little step. It's not like a Buddhist who finds out who God is and has to evacuate all of their life understanding and now take on this new understanding. It's not that. It's a very short step.
You know, though, it's not qualified when the whole idea of faith in Jesus as the way to salvation. Mm-hmm. It doesn't say faith in Jesus, who he really is or who he's meant to
right.
be. So everyone with faith ultimately can be led to salvation through the knowledge of the end.
Yeah, everyone's knowledge and understanding of Jesus is wrong. We all haven't got it. We can't. I mean, we just haven't got the ability to do it. So when we finally receive the revelation, all of the holes will be filled in and all of the crooked will be made straight. We've got the foundations there. So it's just not a big leap to go from this place and this foundation to accepting these things we didn't know before or that we had wrong. I mean, when you have something wrong, I don't agree, when you're in school, when you thought you knew it right and you were excited about this class and you had it wrong and you found out the right thing, were you upset? Got up and left the room, wrote a nasty note to the teacher? No, if you really wanted to know it, you were excited to get it, to get the right answer so that you could have it. Not just so you could answer on a paper, but that you would know it in yourself. So it's going to be the same thing. All right, so we're going to do the second half of this timeline. There was one more video I'm going to give you next week. I'll probably give it to you just as a URL. I'm going to harp back on this. I was asked about it. The two covenant heresy that goes on. There is a series of videos. They're kind of painful to watch. So I'm just going to give you one and you can troll it yourself. They're painful because it's a gathering. I don't know how big it is. I get the impression it's probably 30 people, 30, 40 people. And there are presenters talking to these people. And they're just regular people. And the camera is like down here, looking up. And what's fascinating about it is these are straight up Jews. They are I believe they're in Israel. They're Messianic Jews who are talking to, I think, other Messianic Jews and not Messianic Jews that have come to find out what this is all about. And they are talking about the two covenant heresy. And they are saying flat out, they're going through Romans, which is our hang-up. When you talk to anybody in the Episcopal Church or outside the Episcopal Church who is dedicated to two covenant theology, they always talk about Paul in Romans, talking about Jews, saying, you were the people of the covenant, God made this promise to you, blah, blah, blah. And say, okay, that's it right there. That shows that God can't take away the covenant, it can't be wrong. And this guy just, he trashes it, and he does it from a Jewish perspective. He's not coming at it from a Christian perspective. He's saying, as a Jew, this is what Paul's referring to. We know this. And he's referring to Isaiah here, and we know that. Well, what does Isaiah mean there? Well, that's what Isaiah means there. He's not talking about the people. He's talking about the Messiah. So when he's talking here about this, he's not talking about the people. He's talking about the Messiah. I mean, he's talking about Isaiah. Well, he moved that forward to right here. What he's talking about is the people who need to be saved are the Jews. He's not in the synagogue saying to the Jews, you're great as you are. You stay you stay just like that because the covenant's good for you. He's going into the synagogues and saying, you are broken and sinful in this process. You need to accept the Messiah and be saved. So if we think that we're the only people, or that I'm the only person that's proclaiming this, and it's kind of like way out there in the toolies, it's really not. The other side of it is the as I've always seen it, been the problem. In fact, there is a series of videos now that I've seen a couple of the previews for them that are coming out based on the current Hamas war, the Gaza war, right? What do you want to call it? Israeli-Gaza war, Israeli-Palestinian war, Hamas war. That's coming out. That's talking about the Christians. They're calling it Christian Zionism, which is not a new thing, but it's the title of these videos. And Christian Zionism is there are Christians who are Zionists and Jews that are Zionists, and there are Christians who aren't Zionists and Jews that aren't Zionists. Zionism is the geopolitical support of the state, of the structure of the authority of the state of Israel. So I can be a Jew and not be a Zionist. When I went to Israel, and I say that he was the head of the theology department at Hebrew University, he had a lot of negative things to say about the Jewish government. They asked him, one of the bishops there asked him and said, "How can you be saying this stuff? And you're a Jew." And obviously at that time, this was years ago, the bishop didn't understand. And the guy said, "Well, I'm a Jew, but I'm not a Zionist." This is a word that the Jews had before it became a Christian Zionist. So Zionist is a Christian word, is a Jewish word, but the emphasis on two covenant theology is obviously Christian. It's not Jewish. So these videos that are coming out based on the war that's going on is saying that this right here is an absolute horror on the world, that the Christians are supporting a regime that based on a Zionist perspective. If we're going to support them based on a political perspective, that we need a democracy in the Middle East, okay. But if we're basing this on a Pentecostal or evangelical perspective, saying that they are the first covenant and they're going to be the ones and they're the ones, they come out saying that's just wrong. And the primary people that are producing this video are Jews. They're not Christians. So again, I mean, I think they've done that on purpose to try to take it away, so it's not a bunch of, the criticism that Christians are just, this Christian person is anti-Semitic. That's not.
I think they're trying to separate church and state, just like we've done. I mean.
Well, effectively, the Jewish people shouldn't. They can't.
Well, but that's what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, they are doing. See, so what they're experiencing is the same thing that. The same corruption that hit any one of the countries that had the church and the state as the same unit. Yeah. In fact, you can see this because Israel has always been a theocracy. It's called a theocracy. So not a democracy, right. Theocracy. Focused on God. God tells us what to do and we do it. So the theocracy is as prone to corruption as any other. And you see that in the first century with Jesus. So he's talking to the heads of the church are the heads of the country, effectively. But what has happened in the 500 years prior to that? The heads of the church, who are the head of the country, have all been corrupted. So the heads of the church now are corrupted, and the head of the country is corrupted, and then ne'er the twain shall meet. In the time of Jesus, it was a bunch of tetrarchs. Herod's son. I mean, there were 4 of them. And they were all puppets. They were all, Rome told them what to do and they did it. They just lived in opulence and corruption, and they didn't really, the church hated them and they hated the church, and they hated each other for the same reason, that they're both corrupt. And Jesus came and said, you're both corrupt. So you're running a theocracy, and it goes back to that statement that says absolute power corrupts absolutely. So my mind goes off of God onto the power that I have talking about God. And now I start to change who God is to do me more power. So God fades away into the background. I've created a new God, a facade of God that vests me in more authority or more power or more grandeur or more whatever. And I become an untouchable person. So this was the church of the first century when Christ got there. This is the absolute iron grip on the temple. When Jesus went in to talk and they had they have guards there to stop you from talking and doing stuff and communicating. Just, blasphemy here and blasphemy there. This was all counter to what the intention was.
You think that's one of the why none of the disciples kind of made it into a power position?
Yeah.
They all got killed one way or another.
Yeah, the Acts. So if you read Acts of the Apostles, because the Acts of the Apostles is a church book, so everybody should read that every once in a while, maybe once a year. It's the church book, and says when Jesus was resurrected and went to heaven, what did the apostles do? What kind of church did they set up? And it was a community church. It was a commune. Everybody in the absolute form sold or gave away everything they had and came and lived in concert with the church, with them. In fact, we have that scandalous event where we have a couple people dying because they lie. They say they gave everything, but they don't. They kept on some of it. And so they drop dead, right? And that's a scandalous story, and there's a whole lot of stuff around it, so I'm not going to go into it right now. But that was the intention. They were living out the perfect intention of what Jesus wanted it to be. Everybody together, everybody helping everybody else, everybody altruistic, everybody sharing. Doesn't mean that I don't have a job and I'm not making $5 million a year. It means I have a job making $5 million a year and I'm sharing it with everybody. And you have a job and you're making $30,000 a year and you're sharing it with everybody. And when it's all said and done, we all have the same thing because everything is divided up equally. But we know what that's called today. What's that called today?
Communism.
Yes, it's communism. So communism is basically the perfect political structure to represent the ideals of Christian living. However, we all know what communism represents to us based on, not on its political structure, but on its political action. And that is that in any place where socialism in the world or communism has taken root, it's been absolutely corrupted within the first generation, easily. Because everybody over here who's excited about sharing and being one and having great stuff and it's all terrific, the totally corrupt person uses that faith and that intention to rise to the top, and then...
It's because the problem is that there's an authoritarian communism and not democratic communism.
But it's impossible to have that. You'll never have anything but authoritarian communism because you can't separate the corruption from the intention. And this is what happens...
there are democratic socialisms that have worked.
Yes.
Which is...
Shortly.
You look at Norway and Denmark.
Yeah.
Most of those countries are very successful in their socialist democracy.
They are.
Democratic socialism.
If you dig a little bit, you'll find they have their own issues.
Of course, because still human.
Yeah, still human.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it is. It's this. So you go to the Church of the Apostles fails. It's the ideal that's brought about in the Acts of the Apostles, but by the time that ideal is moved past the apostolic period, it fails. And you have something else that's growing up. And we can't help it. It has to be. You have to have an authoritarian structure to deal and direct. And if you're good, then that authoritarian structure blocks the corruption. And if it's not careful and it's not good, then the corruption becomes the authoritarian structure. And you're done. So, all right, let's see what I got here. Did I turn this on already? I did. So this is going to be part 2. And I'm starting it, just to warn you, just about 3 minutes into it. And that's because he talks very slowly about some corrections he made to last week's video. But those corrections are about, he says it.
As an early breakaway group from Rabbinic Judaism.
He got, after he produced that video, there was about a month in between the two, and people wrote in and said, you didn't include, Leonites. And so he came back and said, okay, well, here's a line to Leonites. I put this in here. And they said, and you said, the one thing, remember last week it said extinct. These churches went here and then they went extinct. They didn't exist. And somebody said, that's a nasty word. You shouldn't say extinct because there must be somebody around. So he went back and said, okay, I'm taking out the word extinct. So that's why I'm skipping all that. I'm moving all the way to there because there's no sense in going through all that. It's just housekeeping. Here we go.
Rather than being completely distinct from it. Another such breakaway group is Beta Israel, aka the Ethiopian Jews. Again, some people theorize that this group can trace their origins to pre-rabbinic times. However, it is clear from their language and customs that they did originally have connections to rabbinic Jews, but then this connection was severed for many centuries until they were once again reunited with the rest
So
of
somebody
Judaism
wrote in and said you have to
in
include that
times.
group.
Okay, let's now turn our attention back to early Christianity. I mentioned last time something called the Pentarchy. The Pentarchy emerged in some sort of official way around the time of the Council of Chalcedon. Basically, by this point, there were 5 major cities that were key centers of Christianity within the Roman Empire. Originally, there had been just 3, Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch. But when Constantinople became the new capital of the Roman Empire, it became important as well. And then there was, of course, Jerusalem, where the whole thing began. So by 451, the leaders of the church recognized 5 key cities. Each was called a patriarchate because each was governed by a special bishop called a patriarch, meaning father. Now, I changed the chart a little bit to make what happened after the Council of Chalcedon a bit more clear. Basically, the majority of Christians in Alexandria, Egypt, and in Antioch, Syria, did not agree with the Chalcedonian decisions. They therefore broke away from the rest and eventually became known as Oriental Orthodoxy, which is distinct from Eastern Orthodoxy. These days, the 2 largest churches within Oriental Orthodoxy are the Coptic Orthodox Church in Egypt and the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, which became independent from the Patriarch of Alexandria in 1959. However, I should point out that the church in Ethiopia has its own very unique history that goes all the way back to ancient times. And as I discussed in my series on Who Wrote the Bible, Ethiopian Christians have a unique version of the Bible that includes several extra books that are not found in most other Bibles. Also, since I mistakenly didn't show a photo of the Ethiopian patriarch last time, I wanted to show him this time. This is Patriarch Abun Matthias, the spiritual leader of around 40 million Ethiopian Christians. Okay, so let's now return to the Pentarchy. Although most of the Christians in Alexandria and Antioch became Oriental Orthodox, a minority did not. That's why I also show dotted lines that stay within the Eastern Orthodox section, which I've now decided to color red. The Christians in these areas that sided with Eastern Orthodoxy were originally known as Melkites, meaning imperial. That term will pop up again later, so I thought I'd point out its meaning now. But here's the thing. In the 600s CE, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem came under the control of the new religion of Islam. Therefore, these cities became less important in terms of Christian leadership, leaving only Rome and Constantinople as the 2 main patriarchates. Therefore, a bit of a power struggle eventually developed between Rome and Constantinople. On one side, there was the fact that Rome, as the original seat of imperial power, had been given, back in the early days of the Pentarchy, a sort of precedence over the other 4 cities. However, on the other side, there was the fact that Constantinople was now the seat of imperial power, and it was the Greek emperor in Constantinople that now appointed the Latin pope over in Rome. As the centuries went by, Rome and Constantinople drifted further and further apart as Europe became divided between the Holy Roman Empire in the west and the Byzantine Empire in the east. This came to a head in 1054 with what's called the Great Schism. The Great Schism can be blamed on many different things, but I'd like to point out just 2. One was a disagreement over whether or not Rome and its bishop, the Pope, was the head over the entire Christian church. According to Constantinople, the Pope was just a first among equals. In other words, he held a special place of honor, but in practical terms, he held no more power than the Patriarch of Constantinople. However, according to Rome, the Pope did have actual authority over the entire church. The other major difference related to the Nicene Creed, which I discussed in episode 1. In fact, I created a bit of a stir because, as an example, I showed the version of the creed used these days by Catholics and Protestants, rather than the one used by Eastern Orthodox Christians. The difference is this line here, known as the filioque, meaning "and from the Son." So, as you can see, Catholics and Protestants say that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son, whereas the Eastern Orthodox Christians say that he proceeds from the Father only. Because of these differences, make it clear that it would be incorrect to say that the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church started only in 1054. Instead, it would be more accurate to say that they both started in the 1st century and that they were simply united up until 1054. So what about the popes then? I mean, the ones from Peter up until Pope Leo IX in 1054. Well, the difference is that Catholics claim that those popes were the leaders of the entire Christian church, whereas in the view of the Eastern Orthodox Church, these popes were simply the bishops of Rome, who, as I mentioned earlier, were, in their minds, simply the first among equals. Okay, so let's now look at how each of these churches are organized today, starting with the Eastern Orthodox Church, which sees itself as a single church, but can actually be divided into 50.
All right, let's stop for one moment. What does first among equals mean here? The Anglican Church is based exactly on this model, first among equals. So we have patriarchs all over the world in the Anglican Church. The only church in the Anglican Communion that does not have a patriarch is the Episcopal Church in the United States of America. We don't have a patriarch. We have a presiding bishop. The presiding bishop is first among equals and acts as a canonical patriarch only at the meeting of patriarchs at Lambeth Palace because they're there anyway, right? When you go to Lambeth Palace, you have the Archbishop of Canterbury is the head of the church. But who is he? First among equals. So that's why in the Episcopal Church and the Anglican Church, it's called the College of Bishops, because everybody's equal. Like a professor in a college is equal to every other professor in the college, and they're getting together to talk and figure it out and agree on it. So it's a democratic process. It really is. So here you can see why it works out to be a democratic process when you have these 5 patriarchies that went across. Actually, the Patriarchy of Constantinople should have been primary because that's where the emperor was. Now, why is Rome the first among equals? There are several historic reasons why, and that's where Paul went, right? That's where Peter went. That's where some others went over time that gave them this precedence. But there's another better reason that is absolutely political. And that is that, let's say, so I am, this bishop and this bishop and this bishop and this bishop, and I'm all over doing bishopy things. And we're all, let's say, let me go to these. We all are listening to what the emperor has to say, who's in Rome. Who are we going to get the straight poop from? Who's going to tell us what really is happening? The Bishop of Rome. The Bishop of Rome has got the emperor's ear. He knows the back room talks, what's going on. He can say that everybody needs to keep your head down because the emperor is getting really mad about X, Y, and Z, and he's going to set a crusade, and this is going to happen, and it's going to happen in a few months, and I'll let you know. So he's sending out information to everybody in the empire so they can learn and hear what's going on before it actually happens and goes on. So he is someone they depend upon to get information. This is why, or one of the reasons why they began to think the Bishop of Rome is running the show. The Bishop of Rome was giving out information. If the patriarchy was here, if the emperor was here, which was after Constantinople when Constantine moved there and made it the capital, then that's how that bishop was functioning. That bishop was now the one who was disseminating information to everybody. But Constantinople fell. Constantinople today is what city? Anybody know? Istanbul. So that is the former head of the Christian world, is in Constantinople under Constantine. And when that happened, the emperor went back to Rome, and that process of information dissemination continued. So really, the precedence of Rome was not based on anything more than the closeness to the emperor and the ability to get information out. That was it. Early on, that was really it. The idea of precedence, as you can see him saying right here, was backdated. After Constantinople, when they had this problem, they started saying, oh, we were always in charge. Since the beginning, we were in charge. But that's really just remaking history. They weren't always in charge. It was a college that existed and was happy to be a college. It was then informationally driven, which was happy to be informationally driven. And then it became, oops, a little walk down the primrose path. We're the most important people, and we tell you what to do. So that's a sad development in the church, as it's always going to happen.
15 equal churches called autocephalous churches. Basically, being autocephalous means that the leader of that church does not have to answer to anyone higher up, other than God, of course. However, the Patriarch of Constantinople is given special precedence and is considered first among equals. This is why the Patriarch of Constantinople is called the Ecumenical Patriarch. Ecumenical meaning representing more than one group. Currently, that position is held by Bartholomew I. Initially, the Eastern Orthodox Church consisted of only 5 autocephalous churches. These were the 4 out of the 5 patriarchates from the Pentarchy, as well as the Church of Cyprus, which had always been seen as being independent, all the way back to ancient times. However, over time, more autocephalous churches were added by Constantinople, such as the Bulgarian Orthodox Church in 927, the Serbian Orthodox Church in 1219, and most importantly, the Russian Orthodox Church in 1589. I say most importantly because nowadays the Russian Orthodox Church is by far the largest of the various Eastern Orthodox churches. It is currently led by Kirill, who holds the title Patriarch of Moscow. The Church of Greece and the Romanian Orthodox Church were the next 2 Eastern Orthodox churches to become autocephalous in 1850 and 1885, which is after each became independent from the Ottoman Empire. The remaining 5 churches all became autocephalous in the 20th century, or in the case of the Macedonian Church, just last year in 2022, which leaves 2 gray areas to discuss. The first being the Orthodox Church in America, which originated as a branch of the Russian Orthodox Church. The Patriarch of Moscow currently recognizes the American Church as being autocephalous, but the Patriarch of Constantinople does not. When it comes to Ukraine, we get the opposite situation. There, the Patriarch of Constantinople recognizes the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, but the Patriarch of Moscow does not. And it's even more complicated than that. And that's because the history of Russia and Ukraine is, well, a bit complicated. You see, both countries trace their origins back to a medieval state called Kievan Rus, which was centered on the city of Kiev. When Christianity first reached that area, the church there was known as the Ruthenian Orthodox Church. However, over time, Kievan Rus disintegrated, and instead the city of Moscow became the dominant city in the region. It was at this point that the Russian Orthodox Church was established, replacing the Ruthenian Orthodox Church. Eventually, all Eastern Orthodox Christians in Ukraine ended up under the jurisdiction of Moscow. However, after the fall of the Russian Empire, some churches in Ukraine declared independence and started calling themselves the Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church, or UAOC. This church operated separately from the UOC, which still came under the jurisdiction of Moscow. This is why later the letters MP were added to the name, to make it clear that it is part of the Moscow Patriarchate. To complicate matters further, a third Ukrainian church emerged after the fall of the Soviet Union. This one called itself the UOC-KP, the KP standing for Kiev Patriarchate. Now, obviously, having 3 different Eastern Orthodox churches in one country is not ideal. So in 2018, there was an attempt to merge all three churches into a single church, which would become known as the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. The merger was mostly successful, and now around 80% of Eastern Orthodox Christians in Ukraine belong to the OCU. However, it wasn't entirely successful. For one thing, there are still some churches that are attached to Moscow, although since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, these are becoming less. And officially, the UOCMP has now cut ties with the Russian Orthodox Church. Secondly, there was also a disagreement between the newly appointed leader of the OCU, Epiphanius, and the former leader of the UOCKP, Filaret. This disagreement led to Filaret attempting to revive the UOCKP, although so far he's had only limited success. So basically, while there is still some disunity, the new OCU is now the main Eastern Orthodox Church in Ukraine. Now, before we move on, I do want to point out the growing rift between the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople and the Patriarch of Moscow. For over 500 years now, Moscow has seen itself as being the third Rome. And since the Russian Orthodox Church is by far the largest of the various Eastern Orthodox churches, it has at times been seen as a sort of rival to the leadership of Constantinople. In fact, when the Ecumenical Patriarch recognized the new Orthodox Church of Ukraine, Moscow decided to break communion with Constantinople, which basically means that they're no longer on good speaking terms. This was made even worse when Patriarch Kirill came out as a strong supporter of the war on Ukraine, whereas Patriarch Bartholomew strongly opposed it. So it's yet to be seen whether or not the current schism will turn out to be a landscape-changing, permanent one. Okay, let's now talk about the Roman Catholic Church, by far the largest church in all of Christianity, with well over 1 billion members representing more than 50% of all Christians. Now, when most people refer to the Roman Catholic Church, what they're really referring to is the Latin Church, which is actually just one of 24 churches that make up the entire Roman Catholic Church. The other 23 churches are Eastern Catholic churches, which we'll be talking about shortly. But since 99% of Catholics belong to the Latin Church, let me take a moment to explain how the Church organizes those 1 billion plus members.
Okay, we'll stop there. So, in an effort to stay true to our time, which I'm usually not, we will honor Sandy in her ministry in the church and not keep going, except for just a couple of points before we stop. So we really are on to this section. You see, they're really starting to divide these two now into the Eastern Catholics and the Western Catholics, which you may not have even known about the Eastern Catholics, because Eastern Catholics are of a completely different ilk. So I went to Catholic University and took classes there while I was in seminary, and by choice, I took them from Eastern Catholics. And Eastern Catholics observe the Eastern liturgies. They were Eastern, basically Eastern, kind of think of it this way, Eastern Orthodox who became Roman Catholic. So they had all of the Eastern Orthodox liturgies, the guys with the hats that you just saw, all of that, but now doing the Western liturgies and ascribing to Rome as the leader of the church. So they're kind of schizophrenic in the Roman Catholic Church, and in fact, the man who was one of my, I can't remember his name, I should, because he was a fantastic professor, absolutely fantastic. Was always positive, but a little testy about it, because he said, although we are Eastern Catholics, old Catholics is another way that they talk about it. I think he divides them here. We have been around forever. Our line of Catholicism has been around forever. We are kind of treated like come-heres. So we are not given, there are no cardinals from us. There are no representatives in the pontificate from us. we are just, we're one of a group when really we're this huge group. We're just not treated well. So we'll see. I can't remember what he says about it. I just remember I believe he divides Old Catholics from Eastern Catholics, and he adds some other stuff in to try to clean it up a little bit. So that's pretty cool. You can see the lines are going over here, and they're coming down. They're not coming here and going in there. So that's why. So it's going to be fun. That's going to be fun. So we'll pick this up where we left off next week. We'll finish this off. We're really getting ahead of ourselves as far as the timeline is concerned, because now we're going all the way up into the modern era, looking at where we are right now. Or we're going to get close to it. We're not going to get all the way, but close to it. And then we're going to stop this section with that little hanging in the air, and go back and start picking up at the 7th century and move forward on world events that brought us forward, and take some time when we get to stuff like the Great Schism in 1054 or 999, depending on how you look at it. And then we're going to look at also the events that led to the church division as we know it in general, which is the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Western Church. We get that in 1054. But we're all going to look at what happens in the 1500s, which is the Protestant Reformation, which creates the Lutheran groups, which is the Church of Luther, and the Presbyterian churches, which are the churches of Calvin and a man named Zwingli. And then past that, the Anglican Church, which is a product of Archbishop Cranmer. We say it's a church of Henry, but there's a finesse to that. And one thing to remember as you leave today, if you're getting tickled about what's coming up because we're getting so close, and people want to tell you that the Anglican Church is Protestant. It's not Protestant. This is a bitter argument that's been going on forever. I will never side with the group that says that it's a Protestant church. It's not. That is the idea of a Protestant church in that structuring is based on the fact that we're not Roman Catholic. So they're saying if you're not Roman Catholic, you're a Protestant. But that is not historically what a Protestant church is. The Protestant churches were part of the protesting Reformation of the church led by Martin Luther, and that group produced the Presbyterians and offshoots and the Lutherans and offshoots, and was absolutely denied and condemned by the church in England. We're not a part of that. Henry would not allow members of the Protestant Reformation on English soil. He absolutely hated it. So to say we're Protestants in any way connected to that historically is just absolutely wrong. And to put us in a group of Protestants simply because we're not Roman Catholic is also absolutely wrong. So if someone keeps telling you that, say, that's wrong, and then move on. All right, so we'll pick up next week.